Welcome back, everyone. Now, trust, when it comes to the context of love and relationships, the first thing we think of is it being an important quality that we look for in a partner. But what I'm excited to talk about today, and what I think is such an important conversation, is how much more broadly this concept of trust is needed to have successful relationships and to be able to navigate dating and life, in fact, in a really healthy, supportive way. So I'm really excited to be joined by Ismene today. She is a former therapist turned transformational coach, and we're going to be talking all things trust and some really cool stuff that you haven't heard before and some really important things that you can put into practice. So welcome, Ismene.
For having me again. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. So we've all heard about how important trust is through the dating process and through relationships. We hear things like, trust the process, trust you'll meet someone, trust someone will love you, trust in the universe, trust in divine timing, trust what is meant for you will never pass you by, right? We've heard most of those things before. However, oftentimes we end up doubting ourselves and not trusting, and we realize that there is this kind of big gap between knowing that we should trust, but actually knowing how do we do trust. And that's what you and I are going to unpack and a whole heap more today, right?
Absolutely. We are.
Where do we start? Let's talk about trust, I guess, as a bit of a concept. Like, what is it and why is this a word that is so important? What does it mean to you?
So if we start to understand and break down trust, so I think a lot in self-help, whether it's in relationships or other things, we have these concepts like love yourself. But the same with trust, it's like, what the hell does that mean? So if we start to like really break it down, so there's two forms of trust. So there's one that's kind of innate in us. So these are the kind of relationships that we had in our early childhood, particularly between around 0 and 2. So it's a secure attachment. So that will be things that are just within us, how trusting we feel of ourselves, how trusting we feel of others, and how trusting we feel of the wider world. So that will be manifesting our desires, how safe we feel the world is. So that's one idea about trust, and that's the really basic concept that's within us. It's intrinsic within us. Or if we haven't had those experiences, it isn't, and we have to kind of learn it. And then there's the other form of trust. When we're talking about trust the process, we're talking about trusting that the relationship is going to come to us. That's kind of more of a learned trust. So we can think about that in terms of how trusting are we of being supported to ourselves? How trusting can we be that we can show up in fulfilling our desires or our needs? So trust is a state. It's something that we can access. It's something that we can learn, but it's also something that's kind of within us. And we don't often get that broken down in that way. We've
had some beautiful conversations about manifesting. And one of the keys to manifesting is being able to just wait in a place of trust, knowing that what's supposed to come or what's my destiny, hold the vibration and just trust. Let's talk about the flip side of that. When we don't have trust, when we aren't in a place of trust, what is our experience like? How would we know when we're in a trusting place versus not having a full ability to trust?
So when we kind of think about trust, we're talking about internal safety. We might feel a sense of calmness. If we flip that on its head, if we don't trust, what we're going to feel is unsafe a lot of the time. We may feel anxious, and we may start to, like in the dating process or relationships, start trying to like force, control, or manipulate. So it comes from this like sense of insecurity. I'm taking all this action, but I can't trust that it's going to happen. And then what we might start doing is like over trying to manifest. I've got to do 600 like affirmations, or I've got to take lots and lots of action. So what we start to like look at practically, that when we don't feel safe in the world and we don't trust, we'll feel that within our bodies. Our nervous systems will start to kind of respond, and we might always find ourselves always on the go. So it's that kind of like opposite to this relaxed, receptive energy that we feel when we feel safe to receive. And trust.
If we weren't made to feel safe or didn't have the kind of parenting that allowed us to really trust in ourselves or in our environment, how might we notice that
So that's a really beautiful question, because quite often we don't realize that it's because we didn't feel safe or secure as a child. So it might start happening in terms of we're looking outside of ourselves for an object of safety. So we might start clinging on to a person. You know, this is a bit kind of like codependency starts to happen when we start looking outside, like this person is my safe space. So we might feel really clingy, or we might feel very anxious, or we might even be controlling. We might also really struggle to kind of like put ourselves out there in the world, because if our experience is that when I needed something or when I desired something, no one noticed, or no one came, or no one soothed me, then it can feel really hard on lots of levels to trust that if we really want something or we feel something, that we're going to get our needs met. So what we might start to notice is that, and particularly as women, we might not identify our needs. We might not know what we want, because that's never been mirrored back to us. We may struggle to ask for what we need, particularly in relationships, or put up with things in friendships, or even dating that is kind of below us, or stuff that makes us feel unhappy. Or we might also find it, and I feel this is a really key one, and something that I'm always learning as well, and what I always help my clients with, is that we may not know how to soothe ourselves. We may not know how to respond to what we want and need. And then what starts to happen is like we emotionally start to starve. And then when we emotionally start to starve, we start looking, you know, this is where things like we may overdrink, we may overwork, we may over exercise, we might start to please or not be able to say no, because it's like we do not have this internal parent, soft parent, nurturing parent that says, hey, you're feeling these things, it's okay to have what you want and desire what you want, and I'm going to show up and give them to you. So it really does affect everything, because, you know, people that really know how to manifest, people that know how to have amazing relationships, it's more than confidence. They have this internal safety. It feels safe in their own heart, their own body, their own mind.
So would you describe that as having a trust in ourselves, or having a trust like in something greater than ourselves, or is it the same thing?
I think I think it's very hard to have a trust in the greater, whatever it is that you believe, like if it's a faith, if it's a religion, if it's a divine calling, if it's the universe, like whatever language makes sense. Remember, how we perceive the world is how we see it first within. So it's going to be super hard to trust, you know, in manifestation, in law of attraction, in the universe, like whatever the vibe is, or even in your actions coming back and actually being fulfilled, if you do not trust within yourself. Because what we do is like the world just becomes a projection, it becomes a mirror for what we believe about ourselves. So the wonderful thing is, if we trust in ourselves, then we will generally trust in others and the world at large, and some kind of like divine higher way of being, if that suits. Yeah.
So in terms of developing a trust for ourselves, right? What if we've come from a series of what we would call like repeating the same mistakes in love? Like I keep continuing to choose the same type of emotionally unavailable person, or I keep missing some red flags, right? And we notice that we have a build-up or a collection of these types of experiences to the point where, in this example, relationships and dating, we stop trusting ourselves, and we have proof that we can't trust ourselves. So where do we go from there?
So I love that question, because it's also just separating who we truly are, what our internal guidance is all. We can always trust ourselves. We can always trust our heart. So separating who I really am, the authentic me, the one that was born and was whole and perfect and gorgeous and knows exactly who I am and what I'm here to do and how to have relationships, and the behavior and the pattern and the conditioning and the armor. We are not those things. So it's like when we start to separate, I'm not getting it wrong, I'm not doing anything wrong here, I'm not bad, I can't not trust myself. All it is awareness. Oh, hey, I keep repeating these patterns that are not that helpful. Oh, hey, Like, I'm witnessing that when someone comes close to me or they feel unavailable, it creates these feelings in me. So it's like learning to be a really gentle observer. And just remember, these thoughts and these feelings are just arising within you. They aren't who you really are. And I think that's the confusion. It's like when we keep running these patterns, we believe it's about who we are innately, and it isn't. It's just learned behavior. It's just protection. It's just what you learn about how to have relationships. But when we kind of like just take this stance of being an observer and being curious, then we can trust ourselves to take whatever action that we need to start to resolve, understand, dissolve, and release these patterns. But I think the first bit is this is not you. You don't have to blame yourself.
That's a beautiful distinction. And what I'd love to explore is like, how do we do that in practice? What is it that we're actually doing in order to notice and be present and see these patterns? And then what are we actually doing in practice to shift things after we see it?
So I think the first thing is just like pause. If you're dating the same men over and over again and it's making you miserable, it's like, okay, let's just stop here. Let's be curious. And then I think once we've identified, okay, this is something that keeps happening. Like, the second process is, okay, I love myself enough to just take a step back, soothe myself. So quite often when we're running a pattern, we will feel quite agitated, our nervous systems are up, and we may feel like we want to take more and more and more action. So particularly if we feel unsafe, remember the nervous system's kind of gone into this fight or flight. So if from that arouse, it's like an arousal state, you will want to take loads more action. I need to figure it out. I need to do this. I need to choose the next person. But actually, which feels counterintuitive when you're in this highly aroused state, is to calm the nervous system. So this is also a way of self-soothing. It's also the way of building trust in yourself. It's also the way of managing triggers and difficult feelings. So we may do things like, okay, so I'm noticing this, but I'm going to go and take myself off and have a bath. I'm going to do some yin yoga. I'm going to journal how I feel. I'm going to go for a really lovely walk and just completely ground. So that's often a stage that people miss out, and it's absolutely vital. Because that just, again, gives this space between what I feel and what I think. And then it helps us build a trust in ourselves. And then from that, we can start to create things like reparative experiences with safe people. I mean, we can talk a bit more about that, but I just wanted to, that is always the second stage that people often meet at. Come to soothe yourself, relax yourself, get to a calm, spacious, still state, and then you'll be able to access a lot more inner guidance and wisdom.
How do you think that compares? So we've just given an example of someone whose nervous system is in a heightened state, right, when they're feeling unsafe. An alternative example to that might be someone who feels really hopeless and dejected, might have completely stopped making themselves available to date or being open to romantic connections, or even, obviously the state of the world that we've been in for the last 12 months. A lot of us have really withdrawn from a lot of the regular aspects of our life, and many of us are feeling a little bit of kind of like hopelessness and stuckness, and perhaps even starting to lose faith or lose trust in some of the dreams and goals that we had before. How would a practice in order to reconnect to a kind of trust differ for someone who was in that kind of situation?
So again, it's the idea of response. So whatever you need, you just learn to respond to yourself. That's how you learn to become a good friend, ally, partner, romantic partner to yourself. So how that would, so that's that person is going to be in more of a low energy. Yeah. So it's like, okay, pleasure and self-care, but I'm going to break down self-care because, again, that's this other concept that people are like, great, what the hell does that mean? So just get into this idea of, okay, so where am I? Like, I'm into dynamic self-care or self-balance. So it's like, okay, so if I'm in a high state, then I do the soothing, calm things. If I'm in a low state, what I know is I need to get my energy up. And the quickest and easiest way we can do that is by giving ourselves pleasure. So, you know, what is it that you really like to do that nourishes you? What is it that enlivens you? What is it that like sets your soul on fire? Because also when we can trust ourselves to make ourselves feel better, guess what? We can trust ourselves to be around people that make us feel good. We can trust ourselves to bring in dreams that give us pleasure. Because otherwise, what are we going to be doing? We're going to be starving, and we're going to be looking for it outside of ourselves. And then we start doing it in this desperate way that quite often gives us results that makes us feel bad, because it's mirroring back. I feel empty, I feel depleted. And guess what? You're going to bring in people that are emotionally unavailable. You're going to be the people that are not taking care of themselves. And then you're both depleted, and then you run in a neglect cycle. So it's like, if people can just really understand this idea that if you can be a container of all that you desire within yourself, that's when the things start to happen with ease. Actually, receiving our desires is actually so easy, but what's hard is becoming that match ourselves within ourselves first.
And that's often sort of referred to as being a vibrational match, or being in the same frequency as the desire that you have. And we often talk about in dating and relationships, being an energetic match for the kind of man that you like. But yet I'm hearing a lot of women complaining right now that they just feel unmotivated when it comes to meeting. They've just had like disappointing experiences. It all just feels too hard. You know, we're not going out and doing the same things that we used to do. So I know there's a lot of us listening, and if that's you, you know, many of us can relate, which is why this conversation is so important.
And I think it's leaning into, what can I do? Because also I think it's really hard to sit on a meditation cushion and just be like, hey, I'm just going to be into trust, and I'm going to just imagine that it's coming to me. I mean, like, some people absolutely can do that, and that's wonderful and great. But again, we're talking about this continuation. There's lots of people that's going to be really tough for. So it's like, for me, I find it much easier to trust that my desires are coming to me and to become into much more relaxed, receptive energy when I'm taking inspired action to move towards that I desire. So for example, if someone is really desiring a relationship right now, but it feels hard to go out and meet people, they don't want to do Zoom calls, like they don't want to go somewhere and wear a mask, like whatever it is, it's like, okay, so if you can't do that right now, come here. What is it that you desire? What is it that you desire in a relationship? Love, support, companionship. Like, how can I move more towards that in my own life? How can I work on my beliefs? How can I prepare myself? How can I do all of those things that help me? And then that will help us have the trust that it's going to happen, because we're actively doing things that bring that into our reality.
Sometimes when people, I guess, get further along in this journey of self-growth and self-love, and we're going to talk about self-care as well in a sec, but we often come up with some aspects, as we talked about this being related to how safe we felt in childhood. We often bump up against some aspects of our childhood that were less than perfect, and some aspects of our childhood or relationship with our caregivers, or lack of, that kind of needs healing. And I wanted to sort of open that up to you about, what's the best way of approaching that, do you think, or navigating that when we find, well, the reason I feel safe is because I had this trauma when I was younger, or it was because of this situation that happened with my dad, or, you know, when I witnessed my parents this happening. And we often don't realize the impact that these things have on our ability to feel safe and to trust. But when we do, sometimes it can be like a little bit overwhelming.
Yeah, for sure. And I can totally understand that in my own life and my own like relationship journey. And I think it can be really overwhelming to have that realization, but it can also be incredibly freeing, because again, coming back to the beginning, you know, thinking this is me, actually quite often it's got nothing to do with who you are, and you're a fabulous, wonderful whole person. But it can also be a freedom to say, oh, now suddenly it makes sense. Now I can put down the state of blame. Now I can put down the confusion. So it's always to remember, because I also understand this, like people have this fear about coaching or therapy. Like, if I go there, if I unpack this, if I'm honest about it, I'm terrified that I don't know what I'm going to open up. And that's such a common theme. So, and, you know, certainly when I've had a lot of therapy and coaching over my life, so it's definitely fears I've had at different points, but it's remembering this is the freedom, this is the liberation, because one of the reasons that we keep repeating the same patterns over and over is because that part of us is like a flower wanting to come out and bloom. It doesn't want to stay stuck. It wants to kind of like be free. So it's like understanding those kind of fears are really normal. But then the beauty is how we start to heal is if we've been hurt in relationship, then we can be healed in relationship. That doesn't necessarily mean in a partnership immediately. It may mean learning to have a safe experience with a friend. It may be going and working through this stuff with a therapist or a coach. I mean, I certainly wouldn't be where I am now if I had not had that container where I could just go and be safe and learn how to have safe, intimate relationships without the fear of being judged, without the fear of being dismissed. You know, just that being able to be who you are and be witnessed and be seen and be heard and be understood is the reparative healing. Because if you haven't had that, you need it in order to heal.
I think that's so important. And I love that you've brought up how important it is for us in our environment, in our friendships, to also create relationships and containers, and I guess that we can feel safe in. And for those of you listening, I would encourage you to really tune in and think, you know, when was the last time I was in an environment where I felt really safe, and who was there, who was I with, and what was that container like, and how can I perhaps create more of those experiences where I'm with people that feel really supportive, and also noticing the opposite as well, I think.
Yeah, because of course, if we've been used to, we'll always go back to what's familiar. So if we've been used to feeling unsafe or not feeling seen or feeling criticized for, you know, who we are, then unfortunately we start to make our way to people that plays out again. So a big part of healing, big part of transformation, choosing something else for ourselves, is also choosing, how do I want to feel in these environments? Like, what would it be like if I could be around people and I could just feel myself? Yeah, I think, and also in my own journey, that's been incredibly helpful and healing. And yeah, we don't have to stay in things. I think that's part of the adult healing. As children, we don't get to decide, but as adults, we get to choose to be around people, the situations and environments that help us thrive, and we're not on our own anymore. And I think that's the thing. No one needs to stay in that really unsafe position.
Coming back now to the practices that we can do and talking about self-care, what are your thoughts about the kinds of things that are really supportive when it comes to feeling safe and really embodying a sense of trust?
Again, I think, because remember, a lot of people have been really desensitized. So also when I'm saying that the desire is the guidance, it is, but a lot of people can't hear their desires because it's like under a lot of like conditioning, so they can't really hear themselves. So really, to have a really good relationship with anyone, to build a relationship with anyone, and we do know this, it takes time to hang out with that person, get to know them, be curious, show up for them. You know, actually trust happens in any kind of relationship over a period of time. So it's like letting go of this expectation that, oh, we've got to trust ourselves really quickly, or, you know, if I doubt myself, oh, you know, got to get rid of that negative thinking. It's like, start where you are, be kind and warm and compassionate to yourself. Start where you are. The way that we learn in any relationship to trust is by spending the time getting to know ourselves. So that might be, in practical terms, having a slot every week that you just show up to be with yourself. You start to learn, what is it that I like? Where do I feel the most pleasure? What is it that makes me feel less agitated? What is it that makes me feel less anxious? What is it that, you know, I love to do? Actually, most people, I've got no idea what they like, what they need, what they want. So it's like, this is how we start to become this trusted friend. And actually, if we put it in those terms, we do know that, because we know, even in dating, you have to go on a few dates to know whether or not you can trust this person, or you even like them, or you vibe with them. And it's the same with ourselves. It's much less complicated than what people think it is.
That's a really good point that you've just made about taking our time to trust, because I think sometimes there's some conflict there. Like, we want to be able to trust someone immediately, but then that also, does that potentially put us in an unsafe position if we're giving trust to potentially the wrong person? How do we kind of navigate that trusting too much to the point where I'm putting myself in an unsafe position versus, what are your thoughts?
I think, and certainly in my own life, because I used to have a lot when I was younger, very, very chaotic relationships, quite harming. I put myself in quite vulnerable situations. And the big shift came from me was when I learned to really listen to my responses, really listen to my guidance, really listen to my wisdom. So I had to have a really good, be present with my body to be able to be like, now when I hang out with people, I'm either drawn to them, or I can feel repelled by them, or I know if something doesn't feel right. So it's like, when we have that innate trust in ourselves, when we've got that really deep relationship in ourselves, we don't need to worry about whether or not we can trust other people. Ironically, because this used to be a massive fear for me. Are they going to leave? Are they going to reject me? Can I trust myself not to be like a nightmare or be destructive? And actually, I mean, this happened over a period of time, but the moment was like, now I can trust myself, because I know when something doesn't feel right. I can notice when there's a red flag. I can notice when something isn't great. So I think, because that can also be too scary for people. It's like, can I trust this? Can I trust them? But also the other thing to remember is, if we really trust that whatever happens, that we're going to be okay, and that everything changes and we can't control what other people do, we can meet the love of our life and for whatever reason they leave us, but can we trust ourselves that we will be okay?
I think that's probably one of the most important things to consider, right? Especially when it comes to relationships. We don't have the ability to be able to control what the other person does or thinks or decides, or the way that they show up, but being able to trust in ourselves. Let's circle back around to, from a practical perspective, what else we can do to actually get to this place where we trust that we're going to be okay.
I think sometimes it's actually about facing our fears. So it's like, we learn the trust sometimes in the trenches. We learn it when we put ourselves out. We go, oh God, this isn't safe. It isn't safe to put ourselves out in the world. It isn't safe to be vulnerable and ask for what we need. It isn't safe to make space in my diary and say no. It isn't safe to put my needs first. But actually, the more that we start to lean into that fear and do it anyway, and then positive things start to happen. I mean, I can guarantee if people only started with creating a self-care routine once a week, and they kept showing up for themselves and they kept affirming, this is something that I'm really important and my needs are really important, I can guarantee they will feel better. Can guarantee that the quality of their relationships will feel better. But it might initially feel really uncomfortable to make yourself a priority. So I think it's like, quite often when we feel unsafe, we want to like move away from our fears or move away from the discomfort and the pain. But actually it's about, we build this confidence and trust in ourselves, like, hey, it feels fearful, but I can show up and be the woman or the man that I want to be, and I can be okay, and I can receive what I want. And then what starts to happen is that we relax and relax and relax, and then become much more of an open vessel for what we want.
What do you think are the keys to creating the ideal self-care routine? Like, what are we really looking for? Like, how do we know if the things that we're choosing to do as part of our self-care routine are the most beneficial?
Because it'll feel good.
Okay.
Because it'll feel good. So it's like, be driven by what is joyful, what is pleasurable. And also we often have these weird ideas about pleasure being something that we have to, being purely only sexual, even though for God's sake give yourself sexual pleasure. But it's like, there is this weird thing, this phrase guilty pleasure. What is that about? We're in this beautiful sensual body that can receive all this different sensation and pleasure, and yet we're often not making that a priority. So it's like, my way of finding what has helped me, what supports me, and the same with my clients, is I say, try everything. Try whatever you feel guided to, what is joyful, what is experimental. Try it for a period of time, and then you will know. If you like doing yoga, you will start to feel relaxed and it'll feel good. You will know if you want to get up and dance in the morning, because it will feel good. It's like, we don't always have to work it out here.
Yep.
Because it paralyzes. It's like, go and just be a playful child, experiment with things, have fun with things, look it up, like do whatever you want to do. Stick with what works and what feels joyful.
Yes. And I love that you mentioned child, like be a playful child. I think sometimes we get to a point in our life where we just are taking things so seriously, right? We forget that laughing, having fun, being childlike, we have permission. That's our birthright, to be able to just have a laugh and have fun and not take life too seriously. And it's so soul nourishing.
It's like, it's essential. So also a big part of being able to trust yourself is trusting that you can give yourself this really vibrant experience of life. So we can have these really challenging, difficult, stressful situations in our life, past or present, and still show up in the joy and the play and the ecstatic bliss. You know, we're humans with these array of emotions. And I think when we allow ourselves to feel our uncomfortable feelings, we also open ourselves up to being able to feel more of the joy and more of the bliss. So it's like essential, because why would you just want to trust yourself that you can make sensible adult decisions? You also want to trust yourself that you can create an amazing, vibrant life. Like, that's also what we're here for. Like, we forget that. But it's really, really key. It's like, yeah, that builds a lot of trust. And if you go back to reparative experiences as a child, that's what parents are doing. If they're tuning, they're playing with them, they're doing things with them, they're cuddling them, they're soothing them. You know, that is also what builds up trust. It's like, can you do that for yourself? Can you just be a wonderful friend and companion? And, you know, if you want a romantic partner, are you buying yourself flowers? Are you giving yourself massages? Are you showing up and doing the things that in your heart every night you know that you most want to do?
I was having a conversation with a fellow entrepreneur last weekend, and we were talking about the fact that, you know, when you have your own business, there's no like clock on, clock off 5-day week. It's almost like 7 days a week for every waking moment. You're almost constantly thinking about your business. And in times when we take like time out to do something for ourselves as part of our self-care routine, we can almost feel guilty, like, oh, you know, am I wasting time? I'm not being productive doing this. So we almost don't allow ourselves to really just enjoy watching some reality television or just doing something that's not productive all the time, right?
Yeah, because also we've been conditioned to feel guilty about thriving. And I think for me, this is a big part of my teaching. It's like reframing. We are here to thrive. Like, we didn't just come to this planet to just do really serious things and just deal with childhood trauma and everything be really hard work. You know, we came here to thrive and experience and learn and grow, you know. And I really believe, although I've definitely grown personally through suffering, and I think that we do as humans, remember, we can also grow with joy. And I think that's another thing that creates boundaries. Trust is boundaries, but also self-boundaries. You know, the boundary that says that we get to decide that everything doesn't always have to be hard work, that we don't always need to be pleasing other people, that we don't have to do things. We're not children anymore, you know, the shoulds and the have to just make life miserable. So I think a big part of trust as well is trusting yourself that you can say no. And that means not just to yourself, but to others, but also these weird concepts that make so much of us unhappy. We don't have to do that just because we've been taught it, and it's been many, many generations before.
It's interesting, when we put feeling good a priority, it seems to be really magnetic to men. It seems to be so soul nourishing that becomes really attractive, right?
Yeah, and again, we overcomplicate things, but of course, when people are in their light, when they're burning bright, when they're showing up in their full essence, and particularly as women, you know, we're got beautiful sensual energy. It's like, of course that's attractive. And also like coming into what we can do to actually start to receive things with more ease. I mean, I've done the whole like masculine, like working loads of hours and doing all of this stuff, and I can tell you I've manifested way more in my life when I've been much more leaning into the joy and the pleasure and the spaciousness, and actually doing a lot less. And I think, again, this is a massive reframe for people. You think, oh, I've got to go harder at the dating, and actually quite often it's about coming back, soothing, relaxing, telling yourself a different story. I'm okay, I can do it, it's happening, the desire is already on my way. How would I feel if it already happened? You know, there's some really nice things that we can do to really get into this lovely, relaxed, joyful place. And then it's like, okay, so if I was going to meet me, how would I feel about me? Am I vibrant and joyful? And because that's the other thing, then we're not so worried about the other person needing to fulfill us if we're already fulfilled. If we're depleted and starving, we're going to be demanding a lot of stuff from that person.
I think definitely when we're in that feminine energy, it's really quite an energy of surrender, where we're just open to whatever happens. It really is the embodiment of trust, right? Whereas when we're in a masculine, we're almost more like wanting to control the situation, or wanting to control and prepare so that we're not getting hurt. It is a completely different energy.
And one's very hard and can actually block intimacy, block what we want. And the other one's much softer. It's much more, you know, you try opening up your heart when you feel really, really tense. This is where relaxation and feeling safe, even if it's only within yourself, is key. It's like you do this and then, oh, it's going to come to me, it's not going to happen. Whereas actually, if you're really, really relaxed, everything is so much easier. So it's like, yeah, a big part of trust is learning to relax and be in that easeful flow. And then obviously as things start to come, your trust builds and it gets more exciting, and then you relax back and lean back in even more, and then it comes to even more. So that's the good news, is that positive reinforcement and momentum. Even though at the beginning it feels counterintuitive, it definitely did for me. It's like, relax, what? Like lean back? No. I used to be terrible, really go for the masculine in the relationships, like I'll lead this. Funnily enough, it didn't work that well, you know, and now I'm in a very different space with the guy that I'm with. But it's all this practice of leaning back, receiving, asking for what you need, having this experience of receiving it, and then over time it's this really joyful reinforcement. I can trust myself, I can trust others, I can trust the world.
It actually reminded me when you were talking about of how often I notice living in Bali back in a time when friends and family could actually come over and visit. I noticed it would take a couple of days for them to sort of get out of that masculine energy and unwind and really relax into the fact that they're on a holiday and really all of their needs are attended to. And it's just, you've been here as well, so you know what it's like. But you almost see this complete different change come over them where they're like, you know, like I would, you know, there's nowhere else in the world I would rather be than right now. Like I don't have a care in the world kind of energy, which is a complete contrast, I think, to how often we actually, the mode that we're in our everyday life.
And actually we think that happiness, again, is this like elusive thing that we've got to like chase. But it's like, and I really learned this after burnout, because I really had to change my strategy about how I was going at life. My nervous system was like, no. But actually, when we're in a really relaxed state, so we know this when we go on things like on holiday, and we come out of our environment and we start exactly what you said, to relax, actually, how much easier it is to feel full up, how easy it is to feel fulfilled, how easy it is. Joy just naturally bubbles up when we give ourselves the conditions that we need to thrive. And actually, on a basic level, it's really simple. It's lots of things like spaciousness, quiet, relaxation, pleasure, joy, play, but in a really simple way. What I've learned over many, many years now of being in personal development space, but also like 20 years of working on myself, is actually the joy and the fulfillment and the relaxation comes from the simplicity. And if you get those foundations down, and you just rinse and repeat. So things like that for me are making sure that not every single day of my life is really, really busy, making sure I have time every day for myself. I do a morning practice every day. I do a meditation before I go to sleep, so I just completely relax. Everything else then becomes easy. The hard bit is the foundations and making sure that you maintain that. But then you've always got this quiet contentment. You've always got this quiet fulfillment. You've always got this joy. It's not that adrenaline, dopamine hit that often what we think about, but it is then from that foundation, everything comes. And that's what we're talking about, manifesting with ease. It doesn't start off being easy, but it is if you've got the right foundations. And a lot of that comes with relaxing. Nourishment, key.
There's one other aspect of trust that I wanted to touch on a little bit, and that we actually kind of forget how important trust is to a potential partner. And we hear, when we do ask men how important it is for them to be able to trust their future wife or trust their girlfriend, we hear that it's very important, but we also are not really quite sure what those parameters are, or when he doesn't kind of trust in the connection or something feels a little bit off, they don't often have the ability to be able to explain to us what that is. If we're lucky enough to find out off a guy like why it didn't work out, they usually give us a excuse that kind of makes sense or is kind of in the ballpark of what they think it might be. But oftentimes it's just something doesn't feel right and they don't quite trust the connection.
Well, I work with a lot of men, so it's been a fantastic experience for me to really understand men in a way that even as dating in a relationship, they didn't kind of get revealed. So something that I really learned was how important, how erotic it is for a guy to feel that the woman has this trust in them, so that they can really step into the masculine, protect, provide. And how often, and I was like, God, why didn't someone tell me this 15 years ago? Relationships are so easy. So when they don't feel trusted, trusted to be that we support them, trust that the woman looks to them, that they can show up for them. When we're being overly critical, I had no idea how controlling often or critical men can perceive women to be. They just completely shut down, because what they see and what they experience is, you don't trust me. You don't trust my ability to be a man. You don't trust my decisions. And I think that understanding of how important it is to relax as women, let the man take the lead, let the man give to you, express what you need, trust that they're going to give it to you even if it's not immediate, really creates this lovely softness and dynamic in the relationship. And actually, when I've worked with hugely successful men, even though they've been on the outside really together, they're making money, they look good, they got the cars, they got the houses, inward they're desperate for a woman to be a soft place to land. They're going out in the world, they're already having to be this hard man in work and with the friends. If they can't feel that they can't trust you to go home or be in a relationship, I always kind of like envision it like, I've done all the hard stuff, and I was my best strong self, and I've had to be courageous, and I haven't been able to be vulnerable. And then I go home and I'm hit with all this criticism and controlling kind of like nature. Where do they ever get a chance to really come down into their heart? And we talk a lot about women being oppressed, but honestly, and I'm not saying that that's not true in some contexts, but we really talk about the oppression of the masculine. We really talk about how bloody difficult it is to be a man in this world most of the time. So it's like, can we also learn to be women where men feel safe to be vulnerable and be themselves? It's absolutely key.
I totally agree with you, but I think a lot of the time we're too worried about what he's thinking, and we're too worried about like showing him our best self, that we actually, and I think you might agree with me or not here, that that's where some of the mistrust can actually come in terms of he can sense sometimes if we might not be really honest about our needs about something, or something might upset us and we say, oh, it's okay, no problem. We're not actually communicating pretty well because we're trying to just be that cool, easygoing girl that doesn't get upset or cause any problems, but he can kind of tell something's a little bit off. And I think that's sort of one example of where there can be a little bit of mistrust in a new connection too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because people are sensing, aren't they? It's like, and I think that goes back to us trusting ourselves. It's like, if we really trust that we are enough, if we really trust that there's someone out there that's going to really value us, then we don't need to be the fake self. We don't need to be, like the tick list of the perfect woman, which is exhausting. And then I think what it opens up for both the man and the woman is this softness where this relaxation, where connection can really happen. It's like, it's really hard if everyone's being the best self. Again, it's going back into this like really like tense thing, isn't it? It's like awkward, it's hard work, it's exhausting, better get racked on the day to try and calm down the nerves. So yeah, I think again it comes back to this self-trust. I am enough, I am worthy of being loved, I am worthy of having a wonderful connection that makes me feel good. I'm open to all possibilities, I'm open to this love making its way to me. And then if we arrive in that space on that date or in that relationship, we're open to 100% possibility. Maybe it's not the right person, but at least then we've gone and been ourselves and it feels much more fun. And then, yeah, of course, the guy picks that up. It's attractive. It's so hot when a woman really values herself. I think it's the most sexy attribute. I really do.
I know many beautiful women that just have such incredible souls, beautiful, beautiful personalities, funny, kind. They have so much going for them, but then they go out on a date and they're just putting forward the version that they think that is going to attract or impress him the most. And there's just such a disconnect. If you're watching and you're experiencing some challenges with not making the right kinds of connections that make you feel safe and comfortable, then maybe look into that and see, are you the same person that you are with your guy friends and your girlfriends and your family as what you are when you're going out on a date?
Yeah, because it's like just valuing, isn't it, who we are and trusting that it's enough.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the girls watching today?
It's just remembering, start where you are. Everything is completely possible. If you don't feel safe and you don't trust right now, that's completely okay. Be gentle with yourself, to be compassionate with yourself. Start there. If you find that you are in the stage where you trust yourself, but doubt, it's like, okay, how do you bring yourself back to a trustful state? How do you come back to calming yourself and giving yourself pleasure? And then if you're kind of in the more advanced stage, it's like, how can you practice receiving more? How can you practice having your needs met? How can you practice calling in more of what you want by really opening yourself up to receive and remembering and trusting that you are worthy of all that you desire? And that's when it really starts to get joyful, and just kind of remembering that it's a process and it's perfectly fine to be wherever you are.
We have a beautiful heart connection meditation available for the ladies today.
So I'm going to be doing a trust yourself, relax and receive your desires with ease. So I'm going to really help people start to go through this process of relaxing in their body, building up this trust, so that they actually get an embodied, practical experience of what that feels like, so that they can keep creating it.
Sounds absolutely beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I've learnt so much about trust today and the importance of it, not only to live a life that feels joyful and full of love, but also from different perspectives, just how it actually impacts our relationship and our ability to receive love. Thank you so much, Ismene, for sharing this beautiful wisdom with all of us. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to joining us again in 2022. And thanks everyone for also tuning in today. We'll see you again for tomorrow's Love Transformational Workshop. Bye for now.